So right, for now, let's turn our attention to this topic. We have until 3 o'clock. We have a great team here today. Starting on my left, we've got Hesham Khalipha, Director of Marketing, Arabsat, Saudi Arabia, who's renowned for doing presentations without a single PowerPoint. And we pay tribute to you, Hesham, for that. Wonderful. We then have Shady Masarweh, I think I pronounced that correctly, hopefully, Head of Capacity Business Management, Belgacom, that well-known Belgium. Besides Belgium chocolate and beer, there's Belgacom. I think it ranks right up there in the ratings. We then have Andreas Spoormaker, who is Director of Customer Solutions for Intelsat, that well-known satellite company. And then introducing you to Ibrahima. What more can I say? I think the staff throw things at each other back there during the session. So Ibrahima Guimba-Saidou, I hope I also pronounced that correctly, who's Vice President and General Manager for Africa for SES, Luxembourg. Last but not least, Scott Sprague, Chief Operating Officer from Asia Broadcast Satellite, Hong Kong. And maybe I have some interesting background with Asia Satellite Broadcast. That was the original Hutchison business, right? And it always, to me, outlines the power of satellites and the wonder of satellites. I used to work for a company called Star TV in the early days. And we had the idea of bringing DTH to Asia. There wasn't a satellite at that stage. And one day, I think it was a guy called Michael Jordan, was looking through the trades, and he came across a satellite. I think it was Westar 6. It is the same satellite. Okay. Yeah. It was Westar 6, and it had launched but got trapped. Its kick motor hadn't activated. It was trapped in low space orbit, and had been written off as space junk. So this guy said, you know what? We need a satellite. We need it quick. We haven't got 2 years to wait. Why don't we approach NASA? Because I've calculated the space shuttle could operate at this altitude. And we asked them if they want to try that arm thing that they've got. So, we reacted as you always do when you hear a really off-the-wall suggestions. We rolled around laughing, saying what an idiot you are. Anyway, the short answer is that NASA loved the idea. They authorized the mission. They plucked the satellite out, came down to Earth. It was refurbed, new antenna, refueled, and kicked up, and it was AsiaSat 1. It is one of your fleet, huh? Okay, that's the difference. It was the Hutchison one. So anyway, so that became AsiaSat 1, which transformed DTH broadcasting in Asia, and through one guy's intelligent questioning. So let me then kick off. I'm going to ask my first question to Shady. Now, the question is how satellites are changing the Africa backhaul landscape, and we presume that means broadcast, cellular, international trunking. I'm not sure it's changing, but how do you see the role of satellites in this very important field? And you're going to need a microphone. Unless you've got very good voice projection.
Right. Good afternoon. I'm Shady Masarweh, working for BICS, Belgacom International. I'm in charge of product management and strategic sourcing for BICS. And just a couple of words about the BICS activities. BICS is a wholesale provider in the segment of voice and mobile data, serving mobile and fixed operators. It's quite active in Africa. It's #1 in voice in Africa. And #1 to #3 on the mobile data products. We also do raw capacity, but on a smaller scale, in parallel with the need for our mainstream businesses like voice. So to answer your question, from the perspective of BICS, we are really active on the international backhaul, not really on the other parts. And from that perspective, well, the major change driver is not satellite in Africa, it's been sea cables. So next to that, of course, satellite still has a major role to play in the African landscape, both for reach, which has been extensively covered, and for our part, for diversity, because we are selling mainly high added value services on top of the transport. And there, the cost of unavailability is just too high. You can't afford the downtimes that are associated with typical sea cables. So when we are speaking with a customer who's relying heavily on our services, and that's the case with many of our customers, we have rules about the diversity that we use. And if there is no cable in the country, of course, we're using satellite, and that's how we started in most of the countries in Africa. If one cable is reaching our customer, well, we still keep at least half of the payload on satellite. If you have two cables, it's still 30% on satellite. And only if you have three cables coming to the country, we go for full cable connectivity. So as you can see, satellite will remain a really important driver for our customers and for us, definitely for those type of services, because countries connected with three cables are not going to be so many in Africa in the coming next 20 years. And that's not to mention the access to more remote locations within a given country. If you take a country like Nigeria, the depth of the country is so big that in many cases you don't want to rely on the local connectivity only in order to backhaul all of your capacity. So their satellite still has an obvious use. Now, the good thing for us is that there is a significant evolution in the satellite technology, and that's going to help us remain competitive in terms of cost structure.
Wonderful. So the news that most people don't want to hear is that it's a sort of declining sort of priority. So from top dog, where there's no fiber, and then it moves down as you get one fiber connection, two fiber connections. But the good news is that there is a role. So backup or disaster recovery or redundancy is still going to play a critical role in the satellite industry. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, definitely. And that's going to be more even the case thanks to the newer technologies that are coming up in the space of IP-based platforms, where you get that flexibility in terms of how your IP traffic is optimized, how it's shared over different customers, over different locations, how it can handle different weather types over a different geographical area. And this definitely enables you to develop service like bandwidth on demand, backup services, overflow services, and these are things that were not possible or much more difficult to achieve with the initial SCPC approaches that we've been using up to now.
If I'm an enterprise and I have considerable amount of bandwidth requirements, and I'm using fiber, which has almost unlimited capacity, let's assume, and then to back that up with a satellite link, you have to squeeze that down to quite a minute amount relative to your normal requirements. How organizations do that? And do you assist, I mean, do companies assist them in planning how to optimize what data should be put back on satellite in the event of disruption?
Well, there is no miracle. If you have 3 STM1s on a cable and you want to pass them over satellite, you just cannot back it up all. Unless you're prepared to pay a fortune. So there, the only solution is to prioritize and to decide on what service you really want to back up versus what other service is more commodity and can afford to be either congested or completely down for the duration of the outage.
So it's a risk evaluation to decide what would be put up onto the satellite in the mission-critical data.
It's also a matter of quality of service management, and again, this is enabled by the newer platforms, which was not the case before.
So more intelligent platforms?
Yes, definitely.
Right, we'll come back to that. Ibrahima, let me throw one to you. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, what your role is at SES.
All right, thank you very much for having me here. Actually, I'm the Senior Vice President for Commercial Operations for the Africa region at SES. And as such, actually, let's say, oversees the activities in the Africa region.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about we all think about cellular as being the big one, cellular backhaul, but tell me about media and the opportunities and how that fits into the mix of backhaul activity with a company like yourself.
I think for those who are familiar with SES anyway, that's maybe media has been there from almost day one. And when I look at, the markets, even the African market today, we see that it's really a growing component in the overall business, whether it is for just broadcasters, but also for mobile operators or down the line. We see today some offering mobile TV, for instance, and down the line also most of the mobile operators actually trying to aggregate TV content and then bundle that with all the value-added services that they have. So in my view, it's a trend. And today what is facilitating that is also the convergence of technology. And I think it's becoming more and more cost efficient to provide those bundle solutions for the mobile operators. And there I believe that satellite can play a big component. One example is, let's say, for linear TV, for instance, you can use satellite. I think it's maybe even a better way of using satellite and bring the media content into the house or whatever places, and then use maybe fiber for the return channels or for other services. So for me, there is convergent complementarity, and that's what's going to help the business grow. That's what's going to create maybe additional revenue stream for mobile operators. And I think all of us actually are probably preparing or prepared to also go in that direction.
We're all aware, obviously, the move from analog to digital on the terrestrial level, and I think for many African countries, I think it's mid-2015 that they have to migrate. Is that a stimulant for more content to now, now that you can digitize channels at the terrestrial level, there's more backhaul opportunities surely to deliver more channels to digital terrestrial broadcasters as well as DTH?
I think, absolutely. And by the way, the June 2015 deadline is not for Africa only. It's an ITU resolution and deadline. So of course, for us as satellite operators, it's an opportunity that we just have to take advantage of, because it's making it much more, I think, attractive to put channels on satellite. Just because if you convert a TV signal from analog to digital, within the same space, more or less, you can fit in 8 channels, for instance.
That's right. All has to be backhauled.
Yeah, and
right.
All does have to be backhaul. And again, maybe a benefit of the satellite there is that from day one, we can help meet that deadline, because we have 100% coverage as soon as any signal is on satellites.
It's there.
So I think that will help the countries.
Exactly.
And 2, I think you rightly pointed out also, we can feed even the towers, right? The terrestrial network. So I think there is a benefits or multiple benefits actually for people to consider that option. One, as I said, they meet the deadline, and 2, that can also feed any terrestrial infrastructure that they're putting or rolling out.
Okay, excellent. Hesham, let me ask you, Arabsat, you've been around this part of the world for quite a while now. How long have you been active in Africa? Just before you do, just once again, tell us exactly what you do.
Well, I'm currently the Director of Marketing of Arabsat. I supervise all the planning and implementation of the marketing strategies all over, including the African region. I'm also currently handling the corporate strategy department in Arabsat.
Great. So you have a good vision going forward. How long do you plan ahead? 10 years?
Strategy-wise, 5 years. Marketing-wise, it's really dynamic now. It's really dynamic. I was actually in a session with the CEO of Saatchi & Saatchi. It's related to our industry, but not in the core. And he says that Nowadays, companies plan for 100 days and then move on. I don't think it fits in the satellite industry.
It doesn't work in the build cycle of a satellite, unfortunately, does it? No. So tell me how you envisage, you're in the sort of general region in the Gulf area. You obviously see Africa as an attractive proposition. How do you see your businesses shaping up in this region going forward? 5 years, not 100 days. 5
years now in Africa. We've been in Africa for 5 years now, since 2007. And since then, 60% of our fleet is being occupied or utilized in African region. And 30% of our telecom services capacities are dedicated to GSM backhauling. And for the past 3 years, I've been coming to conferences and exhibitions, and they've been saying that the cable or the marine cables are taking out of the GSM backhauling. But as Shady said, it's just a matter of 30 kilometers maybe outside the termination point. But after that, satellite is there for the what I call internal GSM backhauling between small cities and the main maybe PBX or the main transmission or uplink facilities to the satellite. And European teleports have been very successful in seizing the GSM backhauling opportunities, because you do the internal GSM backhauling and then you drive it via cable to the European for transit traffic or something like that. So that's a big part of it. And for the past 3 years, we haven't seen any reduction in GSM backhauling. GSM backhauling is still the same. We witness some price sensitivity, but the service is still there. The capacity is being occupied all the time, because you have mature companies who are transferring capacities to the cable, but at the end of the day, you have more coming up, or startups starting doing their own business. And with the liberation of telecom operators in Africa more and more, we witness those who are trying to find or to bypass the incumbent telecom operators who basically monopolize the whole cable marines connectivities or other services in the country. And the cost of using the fiber infrastructure or the cable marine sometimes exceeds the cost of using the satellite for inner land backhauling.
Yeah, people forget, don't they, to cost in the downtime caused by breaks in fiber. And they look at the cost, but they don't factor in what the potential cost is of losing service for a week or 2 weeks, often. Good. Thank you very much, and always great to hear opinions from outside of the region, and particularly now the Gulf. So I'm going to cross now to even further to the east. Scott, Asia Broadcast Satellite, not to be confused with AsiaSat, which is easy to do. Tell us, first of all, how you ended up in Hong Kong, and what does your business focus on, and why is Africa in this area particularly of interest to you?
Okay. Yeah, I recently joined Asia Broadcast Satellite, ABS, in February of this year. Currently relocated to Hong Kong recently. To date, ABS has 4 satellites in operation, so we have coverage basically from Africa through the Middle East, all of Russia, and into the Asia-Pacific region. Africa is definitely one of our key markets, one of our key growth markets as of right now. In January of this year, we moved a satellite to the 3 degree west location. It's our ABS-3 satellite, and we've been basically focused on going after and supporting the backhaul wireless market in Africa with that satellite. So we've rolled out a service on our C-band beam called On C-band. It's a bundled offering, and it's been an interesting experience for us, because we turned up a teleport, a station in Nairobi. We became fiber customers this year. That was an interesting experience. And as a satellite operator, I think I have a new appreciation for the uptime on satellites. And I think as we go forward here, I think we're going to see a lot of growth in the satellite industry over the next couple of years. I think we've seen the downturn from fiber hitting the continent, and now customers are realizing that you need reliable, cost-effective services. And that's what we're trying to build with our ABS-3 offering. I do appreciate the fact that satellite can be more expensive than fiber, but as you correctly pointed out, it isn't necessarily more expensive if you lose millions of dollars because you can't run your business. And so there has to be a balance there. And we're looking to provide very cost-effective solutions in Africa via our new satellite that we've put at 3 degrees west.
Okay, wonderful. Question, I mean, is there a chance that too much capacity is going up over Africa, or do you think the balance is being maintained between demand and supply?
Well, I think always for satellite operators, you know, and as you pointed out before when we were talking about the planning cycle, right? We don't have a 100-day planning cycle. We have a 3-year plus planning cycle when we're going to launch and build a satellite for a specific market. I think, you know, in all likelihood, there'll be a bit more capacity than we need in Africa. But as we're hearing, there's more demand coming with a variety of applications, whether it's DTH, TV distribution, or the GSM and wireless backhaul applications. If you look at a market like Latin America, right, the satellite operators got it wrong. So everybody backed away when the price points started to decline when fiber came in, and there was a little bit of shakiness in the economy in Latin America. And what you saw was that satellite capacity was relatively scarce. And in fact, if you had a KU-band satellite over Latin America today, you could probably sell 40 transponders in a month or so, seriously. And I think in Africa, the satellite operators have actually gotten it right, in that they didn't back away from the market when the fiber came in. But on the contrary, they started to continue to invest as an industry in the African marketplace. And so I think there'll be a bit of capacity coming into the marketplace, but I think over time you'll see that capacity be taken up.
Okay, that's a great analogy looking at South America. And it shows you, as you say, how delicate it can be sometimes, the demand and supply side. And they tipped over the one way and then it comes back the other way. But your feeling is that the operators are basically getting it quite right in Africa.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the challenge for the operators will be that, you know, we were used to and we enjoyed a certain financial model for a number of years in Africa. I mean, the prices in Africa were very robust and very strong for satellite operators. The challenge now will be to launch cost-effective satellites into the marketplace that you can price competitively with the other technologies that are available that allow your channel partners and your customers to be successful and profitable in the market.
Okay, excellent. So Andreas Spoormaker, so from Intelsat, tell us a little bit about what you do when you get up in the morning. And I take it you're based in?
I'm based in Washington.
In Washington. Okay, I hadn't figured that.
With a South African accent, yes.
Exactly. Okay.
And we have Americans in South Africa, so that's just how the world works these days. So before I answer the question, I want to continue where you left off with, you know, the space shuttle and the recovery of the satellite. So Intelsat had a similar satellite called Intelsat 603 that we launched as well, and it didn't fire the last rocket, so it was also stuck in a sort of a mid-orbit. And actually this year is the 20th year anniversary of the satellite. It's still actually operating in our fleet, still serving customers on the Africa continent, so way beyond its design life.
You know, we should tell, there's that other well-known South African who was one of the early Google pioneers, and he's got his own spaceship company now. Maybe we should tell him there's a big business in recovering satellites and bringing them back again.
Yeah, so actually if you go onto YouTube, you'll see actually the footage about the actual space shuttle Endeavour going up and recovering the satellite and then pushing it. We actually attached a motor to it and we pushed it into final orbit. So 20-year design life, you know, still pushing traffic, and yeah, in November this year we'll push it into deep space. So what
shouldn't you recycle?
We did, right? Else we had to build a new satellite. So so yeah, I basically head up the customer solutions department worldwide. So I have visibility into Africa as well as the other parts of the world. For Africa specifically, obviously, we've been here since 1965. Had the first service with Telkom South Africa. And, you know, today we sit with 24 satellites covering the continent. So pretty good visibility as to what's going on in the market. You know, where do we see growth? Where do we see declines and so on?
Well, tell us. Where's the growth? Where's the decline?
Yeah, so I think, you know, in terms of usable units on the satellite, people see it currently as being flat or trending towards being flat, not a lot of growth. But in real terms, if you look at the technology changes that have occurred over the last couple of years on infrastructure, specifically on modem technologies and some of the applications, there's been tremendous growth. So a couple of years ago, you would get 1 bit per hertz through a specific transponder. If you read the latest press releases, it's about 7 times that.
Wow.
So, we've seen the growth.
It's just better codecs or what? What is driving that?
I think part of these technologies, about 4 or 5 years ago, it was really difficult to convince people to go to new technologies. Bandwidth was cost effective, so there was no real reason to push the limits. I think with the capacity crunch in Africa, similar to what you see in Latin America today, folks were forced to look at this. So, I mean, if we look at a technology like carrier and carrier, there was really a slow adoption, and then people were pushed to it. And suddenly we see a wide adoption of this, especially in the GSM backhaul space. And so while you won't see the growth in absolute terms or in the short term, people were optimizing their capacity and are still doing that. So where typically people would get a 1-for-1, we see now even in a GSM backhaul space, 3-to-1 in actual usage. So if we look over a 5-year term from today, for Africa, I think the average usage for cellular backhaul, if you combine, the whole sub-Saharan Africa region, it's about 5 gigabits. That's predicted to grow to 15 gigabits. I mean, that's 4 traditional additional satellites in the next 5 years. So, while there seems to be some excess capacity now, that surely will be taken up in the foreseeable future.
Well, I think that's a fascinating point, is the ability of the industry to keep on improving. Just when people thought things had got a bit static, new technologies are coming in, greater efficiencies, which should reduce the price coefficient somewhat as you're able to put greater throughput through, which makes it all the more attractive. So maybe we can come back to that. But why don't we now come to the audience, and I know you've been carefully thinking about all those questions you wanted to ask. We've got a great panel here, and this is your opportunity. So who's going to kick off? Anyone who stands up is Terrapin. All right, this is it's an interesting part of the whole satellite industry we're talking about here. Must be something that you want to ask these gentlemen. Otherwise, we'll keep on talking. Ibrahima, while everybody's thinking about that, tell me, looking at, we heard earlier, I mean, obviously, the African challenge is you've got a lot of people who live on, relatively small incomes, and the sort of potentially 900 million people. How many of those are potential in the next 5 to 10 years are potential candidates for these type of services? And when you do your planning, do you factor in that these people are going to be moving up the socio-economic ladder somewhat? And I heard recently somebody say that there are more middle-class families in Africa than there are in India. Now, if that's true, it represents a remarkable opportunity, because we forget that in Africa often salaries are pooled somewhat in a household. So when you look individually, they may not be capable of buying services, whether it's smartphone, internet services, but if you put them together, there is collective buying power. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, actually, absolutely. I was even tempted of saying maybe the whole 900 million people were still a target. But joke aside, I think a good portion of those 900 million are potential target. We mentioned fiber earlier, and rightly so. It's really only people who are within maybe 30 kilometers away from a cable node that are, let's say, that are having a good customer experience, if you will, from the ICT perspective. So for me, the rest is a potential target or customer base for us. prediction is that you have about 300 million people who actually would be 50 kilometers away from those cable nodes in the upcoming years. And these are those who are somehow connected. So you can imagine the level of experience that they will have. On top of that, you have 400 million people who will not be connected at all. So I'm not far from the 900 million people. So I think 700 is quite a good number to try to serve. And we can't also talk about growing the industry or even the various players growing if they do not try to better address that customer base. And I think satellite, through the technology, the various examples that were given, efficiency, but even the way networks are designed today. We have a combination of hybrid networks, because also there you can leverage all the technology to better utilize satellite in a cost-efficient way to enable those 700 million people, I'd like to keep that number just because it's high, to enable them actually to join the community. When it comes to whether it's mobile, I think, again, technology exists today to go even in areas where you have few people, right, with the femtocell and things like that. And you can do those extensions with via satellite. So to me, when I look at the next few years, there is a huge potential. There is a huge potential of people that we as a satellite industry can serve cost effectively. And it's something, at least at SES, that we're really very mindful of. And we're trying just to find the best, maybe strategy to capture that. We'll make mistakes, definitely, but I think at the end of the day, we're going to get it right. We're going to try to leverage as much as we can what we do best and how we can get closer to the customers to also better understand their needs and bring those services to them, again, in a cost-effective and efficient way.
I think, when I look back, as I said before, I used to run a telecom company that MTN had went into Africa. And, in the early days, people would never have believed the penetration that we've achieved. Telecoms in Africa 10 years ago was, skimming the top end of the market, very high prices. And I think MTN was one of the first companies that said, if we were to make the service affordable and coupled with providing world-class technology, not, redundant technology that's been dumped into Africa, that the market will grow. And today, if you took South Africa, it's 80% penetration. I don't know if anybody hears what the latest figures are. 90% penetration, I think, in South Africa. Nigeria has gone from 0.4% penetration, I think 0.04% penetration, to today probably 50 to 55% penetration. So the demand to communicate with one another has been a driving force from not only a business but a societal in terms of wanting to communicate and so on. So the question is the next step now people wanting to move into being able to be connected to the worldwide web, and so that a person in Africa feels just that sense of connectedness as someone in Europe does. It may mean that they're not getting broadband, but it may at least mean that they're getting some connectivity which is going to benefit them in their day-to-day life or their business. So anybody like to tackle the question of mobile? Is mobile destined to be the predominant way in which people in Africa are going to access the internet? Why don't, Shady, you tackle that?
All right. So I think that's a pretty true statement. The reach of internet access is going to happen through mobile in Africa. There are several reasons to that. They relate to the availability of infrastructure, where, if you look at how internet has deployed in Europe or in the US, it's been mainly based on infrastructure in the ground, but that comes together with availability of power, with high population density, with availability of roads to get to the different places, etc. And in Africa, if you're going to leapfrog all of this, because technology is there, the demand is there, well, mobile is probably the only way that it's going to happen. So yes, definitely.
And I mean,
that's
today
the way.
phones increasingly, you know, most new phones have a browser these days. You know, and in Africa, the old phones were, you know, barely made a call. But increasingly, the connectivity is there, and they come bundled. And, you know, the applications are there, you know, the Facebook and the Twitter and everything else. So it's leading them in, isn't it, to a sense of this is normal. You know, I talk to my friends, but now I'm going to, you know, communicate, you know, through a data medium with them as well. So I think we're saying that this is probably a natural evolution. And although the terminal's small, it's better than no terminal. And you can always charge a phone using solar, whereas you can't drive a PC often through solar because it draws too much. So it's an interesting one. Anybody had some thoughts yet as to questions you'd like to ask? And there's a trip to South America for the first question to spot the state of the satellite industry. Still not working? All right, Scott, your thoughts. Again, tell us from the Asian perspective. I know you've only been there since February, so maybe a bit unfair, but what can we learn in Africa that you know, Asia may already be exploiting? After all, you've got 2/3 of the world's people there.
I mean, I think the one thought that I had when you talked about 900 million people and a middle class that may be as big as India's middle class, if you look at India and the way that they have embraced DTH in India, they're adding 1 million subscribers a month in India for DTH services. So over time, if you look into the African marketplace, and as Africa starts to get more options and more choices in the market from a DTH provider perspective, I think you'll see that growth happen across Africa. It'll be dependent upon content delivery and other things, but you're starting to see some new players come into the marketplace, and they aren't just focused on one specific regional market, but more pan-African market. And so if they can approach anywhere near the growth that we've seen in India for DTH services, you'll see a tremendous demand on satellite capacity for the African marketplace, especially for the KU band capacity that's going to be coming into the market from all of the satellite providers that are sitting up here. And so I believe the growth will come from that, and I believe the growth will also come from the mobility applications, just like you said. If you look at, you know, if you will, the next generation, our kids, how they communicate with each other and the devices they use, right? It's not voice, it's not sitting in front of the PC, it's on a mobile device, and it's all about data transmissions. And we're going to see that in Africa like any place else in the world. So like we're seeing it in Korea and Japan today, I believe you'll see that in the African marketplace.
Excellent. I think just to draw some experience from my Star TV days when I was there to start pay TV because there wasn't any, but it always reminds me how you underestimate opportunities, because we had this platform, we had a big uplink facility, and we were focused largely on China at that stage. But a guy from India came along and he said, I want to set up a programming company, deliver channels in Indian languages. And they so underestimated him that they said, it'll probably never work. Just rent them some space on the satellite and we'll charge them a fee for uplinking them. But it went like this. And anybody who knows ZTV in India, Subhash Chandra, knows what a mega success it's been. But by the time our guys, geniuses, realized it, they said, didn't we have an option to buy 30% at next to nothing? They called for the contract, they got it, and it expired 2 days beforehand. And that stake today is worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's easy to underestimate opportunities because things move so quickly in these new emerging markets.